Try not to think about purple gorillas. You can't, can you? I know even those of you saying no right now are secretly thinking about them. This is because we are all conscious. What really is consciousness, though? I'm sure everyone here comprehends consciousness because we all, every one of us, experts. We are incredibly experienced with being conscious. And while few of us may believe that we are all just Sims in some being's game, none of us can deny that our own thoughts control our inner dialogues. Consciousness does go away sometimes, though. For example, when we sleep or when we're under anesthesia, there are actually many different varying states of consciousness. From driving to work to in school and not really remembering how you got there, to being in a deep coma, or what we sometimes insensitively call a vegetative state. These come with many ethical dilemmas. Can all levels of unconscious people feel pain, even if they can't respond to it? Are they partially aware of what is happening to them at some physiological or psychological level? Is consciousness a requirement for a quality life? These are not easy questions to answer, especially if it's for a loved one. Moreover, medical technology is improving, allowing us to rescue people from the brink of physical death. Our innovation allows us to move consciousness from the realm of the unknown to the realm of heartbreakingly relevant. We have to keep questioning the dynamic behind consciousness. It's quite literally what defines life as we know it. There are two main forms of consciousness. The first one being our experiences in the world we live in. Our brains do not have direct contact with the outside world. All the brain gets are electrical impulses from sensory neurons only indirectly related to the world. Your brain takes this new information and combines it with our past experiences to make up what is actually occurring. Our brains take their best guesses as to what is happening, and that's what we perceive. Our brains actively generate our reality. We take this information and recall that the definition of a hallucination is an uncontrolled perception. Placing these ideas together, we can say that our perception is a controlled hallucination. We're constantly perceiving what is happening, therefore we are constantly hallucinating. As neuroscientist Anil Seth says, reality is just shared hallucinations. We perceive and put ourselves into existence. Now we can also apply this theory to self-consciousness. We have many different selves: our bodies, perspectives, wills, our narratives, and our social lives. Everything about ourselves is built from our memories and social interactions. Our brains have made this delicate construction of a unified self. Take our bodies, for example. Just like our conscious experience, our body guesses what is our body and what isn't. There's a stark difference between the different organs in our body, but we don't notice it until something goes wrong with homeostasis. Our inner body seems like one whole until something goes wrong. Without consciousness, there's nothing. There's no joy, there's no pain, there's just you. We all have our own unique consciousness. What you are thinking and aware of is very different from the person next to you. You may have a shared experience, but not the same conscious reaction. There are times when we lose consciousness and also different consciousness disorders. These difficult conditions are what research into the physical footprint of consciousness is hoping to address. We are conscious because we are alive. We are made of trillions of little cells that create our consciousness. Right now, it's just a bag of magic tricks that we don't understand. Our goal is to understand the neural correlates of consciousness, the NCC, or the minimum amount of neuronal mechanisms to create any specific conscious experience. We know that it can be limited to less than the whole brain. Consciousness still exists in people who have damage to their cerebellum and in children born without one. We believe that the NCC would need a more complex circuit than the cerebellum, something with feedback loops based on the time needed to perceive something. Studies suggest that the consciousness seems to be so complex that it involves more than one and possibly several areas of the brain. We believe that the cerebrum, where the brain integrates complex neural functions such as emotion, judgment, and voluntary movement, plays a big role in consciousness. A key factor in this more section is the gray matter of the cerebral cortex. Studies have shown that the neocortical tissue here helps to generate feelings. The posterior hot zone has also shown promise in the search for consciousness understanding. This is identified using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or an fMRI, to see what areas of the brain are active when people in various conscious states are asked questions. This major region is where we process the sensory information that we see, hear, and touch, and integrate it into our conscious perception. One of the major ways we go about testing the areas of the brain is electrical stimulation of specific areas. Neurosurgeons often use electrodes to stimulate the areas around a tumor or locus they are trying to take out to measure the cortical tissue's function. When the posterior hot zone is stimulated, there is a diverse response of many specific feelings and sensations. We can also look at procedures where sections of the brain are removed due to tumor or to help reduce seizures. Evidence from surgeries that remove parts of the frontal cortex reveal that the area has very little to no effect on conscious experience. On the contrary, when parts of the posterior hot zone were removed, patients would go down in classes of consciousness, losing the ability to recognize faces or see color, motion, and space. We don't quite understand the crucial difference in these areas yet, but we are getting closer. How conscious works physically is critical to recognizing and treating the various consciousness disorders. It's important for diagnosis, prognosis, ethical considerations, family counseling, and treatment options. Some of the main disorders are persistent vegetative state, also known as unresponsive wakefulness syndrome, and minimally conscious state. In a minimally conscious state, the brain is still perceiving things, but they don't experience them. Some of these patients are conscious, but unable to produce any behavioral response. One of the main issues with this field is misdiagnosis. Patients in a minimally conscious state are misdiagnosed as being in a vegetative state 20 to 40% of the time. There's a stark difference between the two states, as patients in a vegetative state have a much lower chance of recovery. The different states of consciousness propose hard questions and raise ethical concerns. With patients in lower classes of consciousness, doctors and family members have to make difficult decisions. Whether the patient or family member can feel pain, if they're misdiagnosed, and their course of treatment all have to be evaluated. Loved ones may have to decide whether or not to keep their close ones alive and evaluate their standard of living. In many cases where family members are not present, courts have to decide whether nutrition and hydration should be withdrawn from vegetative patients, with many of these cases depending on the level of consciousness. We are working towards different ways to measure the level of consciousness of unresponsive patients and look for signs of discomfort. New training, laws, technology, and techniques are being used to understand how consciousness works and how we can correctly evaluate the level of consciousness. Our consciousness stems from the fact that we are alive. We are taking great strides in research to understand consciousness and solving one of humankind's greatest mysteries. With the momentum of understanding the physical function of consciousness, we are better equipped to deal with its disorders and questions surrounding it. Most importantly, the more we understand, the more our conscious can wonder and explore.